The old man's ghost passed through the wall, slipping out of sight like a child down a slide. Sadie Marshman let out her held-in breath, but the tension didn't leave her body. That had been the 12th ghost this morning. How many had visited while she'd been unconscious or out of it on hospital drugs? Sadie couldn't say, but since they'd weaned her off the good stuff, she'd become more aware of her surroundings. Wasn't it enough that she'd had her accident and sustained her head injury? Must the dead also visit her? At first, she'd thought it was only a hallucination. But she'd inquired about one of them, whose name she'd gleaned from their wrist tag as they pushed a spectral IV stand. It turned out they had died at this hospital. Sadie was seeing dead people. God, she wanted to go home and for everything to return to normal. Sadie wished Neil Lynch had never asked her on that date. Yet, it was hardly his fault that she didn't know how to ice skate and lied out of fear of looking stupid. Well, she'd made herself look foolish, all right. Sadie pulled the sheets up to her chin and kept her eyes peeled, scanning the walls. The ghost of a nurse backed into Sadie's room, wheeling a cart containing trays of food. Sadie yelped and flinched away, banging her tender skull on the back of the hospital bed. The nurse frowned and appraised Sadie. "Oh dear, is that bruised noggin of yours still giving you trouble? Would you like some stronger painkillers? I can also ask the doctor to pop by if needed." Ah. So, not a ghost, then. A nurse. An ordinary, flesh and blood, bills to pay, money to earn woman. ... Sadie, whose head did indeed ache, shook her head and smiled, pretending that her vision didn't swim. She resisted the urge to rub the back of her head. "Nope," she lied. "No pain at all. I was snoozing and you gave me a start." The nurse set Sadie's meal on her bedside table and wheeled it around within reach. "Sorry, my sweet. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Sadie's smile faltered, but she held onto it like she shove-held Neil's hand on the ice rink. "I'm feeling a lot better. I don't think I need painkillers at all, anymore. I think I'm pretty much fine now." The nurse brightened. "Oh, well that's wonderful, my sweet. I'll still leave them with you, in case you change your mind. But I'll let the doctor know you're improving. If you keep this up, you'll be out of here in no time." "I'd like that. You've all taken good care of me, but I'd love for everything to get back to the way it was before." "Aye." The nurse said she understood and that Sadie had been the best kind of guest, laughing at her joke. She said she'd see Sadie at lunch, then left to check on the other customers. Sadie thought about taking a pill to numb the pulse at the back of her skull, then discounted it. Ordinary people didn't have to take painkillers for their bruised head. Sadie pulled her bedside table closer and wrinkled her nose at the hospital food. She sighed and picked up her fork. In the corner, something rose out of the linoleum floor. She froze, like the ice upon which she'd struck her dome and taken 2 weeks vacation from life. There was something wrong with this ghost's head, and when he turned to face her, Sadie screamed and dropped her fork, which clattered to the floor. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle the noise. The ghost, whose distorted head had a dent in one side and a bulge out the other, jumped. The damaged eye bulged from its socket, and his jaw hung like a broken coat hanger. It was as though someone had modeled him out of clay, and then dropped him before reaching the oven. "Sadie?" he asked, his spectral voice undistorted by his facial damage. "Is that you? Can you see me?" Sadie's stomach belched a bubble of acid up her throat. Everyone knew Gavin. He was the school's lovable idiot. She gave a weak smile. "Hi, Gavin. I didn't know you were dead." Gavin Thornton shrugged. "This morning, I put an engine in a shopping trolley to see how fast it could go. Was doing pretty well. till I hit the lamppost. Sadie grimaced. Oh God, I'm sorry, Gavin. Yeah, well, what Chaganato? Dad said I was gonna kill myself by the time I was 18. Guess I've got him beat. That's enough about me, though. Since when can you speak with the dead? Hey. Sadie pointed to her bandaged head, a minor injury compared with Gavin's. Also recent. Although I can't say I'm fond of the skill, I wish I could go back to normal. Gavin nodded, his jaw flapping like a curtain in a breeze. I get that. Although it's been nice for me to have a chin wag with someone not dead. I'm glad we could have this chat before. Well, whatever comes next. But I hope it wears off soon. Hey! Gavin paused. And if it doesn't? Sadie looked down at her hands. I don't know. Listen, I wasn't ready to die, you know? I wish I could come back. Yeah, that must be tough to wrap your head around. To come to terms with. But I can't change that, so I've had to accept it. Maybe this speaking with the dead thing will fade. And maybe it won't. Either way, you have to live with what comes. It's like my mom always says, grant me coffee to change the things I can control, and wine to accept the things I can't. To rage against things out of your power is to go mad. Sadie looked into Gavin's one good eye. Anyway, I must get going. I've got a hot date. Hey, you know where I ought to go from here, do you? Go us. Sadie pointed to the wall opposite. All the other ghosts seem to be heading through here. Not sure where it leads. Good luck, Gavin. It was nice knowing you. Gavin popped off a salute, which seemed grotesque with his semi-crushed melon. He faded through the wall. See you around, Sadie. Sadie sighed and looked down at her meal. She'd never felt less like eating her whole life. Seeing bits of Gavin's gray matter hadn't helped. She reached down and retrieved her lost fork. She began to pick at her meal and wondered when the next ghost would arrive. Pass Down Pages was my favorite bookstore in the city. Each and every novel was pre-owned, sold to the store, and placed on the shelves at ridiculously low prices. I would go in every other Friday after I got paid, right before class, and browse the romance section in search of trashy novels about billionaire CEOs and their secretaries, daydreaming about one day meeting a billionaire of my own. Unfortunately, you don't meet billionaires in used bookshops. I was skimming the back of one of those novels when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. The bookshop had a cozy little reading corner with a brown leather couch and 2 red armchairs, all placed next to an electric fireplace that usually never worked. This day, however, the faux flames flickered over the waxy-looking wood, and a young man in a black sweatshirt sat in one of the blood-red armchairs to its side. He had a book in his lap, but he wasn't reading it, instead staring at me with his sunken, bloodshot eyes and an uncanny smile. Something about him was familiar. Perhaps I had seen him in the store before? I tried to just look away, plucking another mildly interesting title from the shelf and skimming its back cover, but I could still feel the man's eyes on me, as if he was boring a hole into the side of my head with his gaze. My stomach filled with dread, my knuckles going white as I clutched the book in my hands. I told myself I would just come back the next day to find my next read, placing the book back on the shelf. His eyes were on me until I finally stepped out of the doors. I could still see the strange look on his face as I continued down the sidewalk. His too wide smile gave me chills as it flashed in my mind, my unease not settling until I set foot in the Daily Brew. It was my favorite coffee shop, an industrial-looking little hole in the wall with prices just under their chain store competitors. I stopped by nearly every day before my lecture and ordered the same thing, a large hot caramel latte. I took my ticket, 813, and stood up against the exposed brick wall, scrolling mindlessly on my newsfeed as I tried to forget the strange man from the bookshop. I skimmed through the headlines. Governors crack down on crime. 7 signs you're being stalked. Hit and run on 34th Street. Order 813. My head snapped up to see my order on the counter. I shoved my phone into my pocket, taking the piping hot beverage from my barista's ice-cold hands, my heart stopping as I met their familiar bloodshot eyes and uncanny smile. The man from the bookshop. He'd never worked here before. My blood ran cold. I snatched the cup from his hands and bolted for the front door, but instead of being greeted by the cool air outside, I found myself in my lecture hall. Professor Thompson was writing on the board in the front of the class as other students filtered in past me. I looked behind me. The Daily Brew was gone and replaced with my university's halls. I went to my seat, my legs too shaky to continue to stand, and sat my coffee down on the table, picking up my pen. When had I grabbed my notebook? I began to jot down the notes on the board, trying to ignore the rapid beating of my heart. I reached for the coffee, bringing it to my lips. The taste was warm and metallic. The thick, creamy liquid making my stomach turn, knowing the salty beverage was not my morning coffee. When I pulled the cup from my mouth, I saw the lid was stained red. As I started to grow sick, I heard someone sitting down behind me. I could feel their eyes boring into the back of my skull. I shut my eyes, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. My heart pounded in my ears. A cold hand gripped my shoulder. Against my better judgment, I looked. There he was, black sweatshirt, bloodshot eyes, uncanny smile. I shrieked, falling back in my chair. Then, I was behind the wheel. It was a foggy night. Even with my headlights on, I could hardly see a foot in front of me. The low lights merely reflecting off the thick mist covering the road. When had I started driving? Where was I? I saw a flash of green, a sign glinting in the light of my low beams. My head turned to read it, 34th Street. As I turned my attention back to the road, I noticed him. I slammed on my brakes, the screech echoing into the silence of the night as my car stopped just before the crosswalk. He just stood there, staring at me with those damned unblinking bloodshot eyes. It all began to come back to me, where I had seen that terrible face before, as he slowly crawled onto the hood of my car. I couldn't break eye contact as he inched nearer, couldn't move even as my brain begged me to. I was completely frozen in my place, every part of me aching as the chill in the air settled into my bones. "No!" I screamed. "You're dead!" The corpse didn't care about my cries. He reached through the windshield, his frigid hands stinging my neck. I gasped for air as he squeezed and tried to scream, though no sound would escape me. I clawed at those cold, dead hands, tearing the skin from his arms, tears streaming down my cheeks until I physically couldn't anymore. The world went dark. Police report. Date: October 4th, 2024. Reporting officer: Daniel Powell. Incident: 19-year-old Holly Lovett was found dead in her home this morning at 8:53 a.m., discovered in her bed by her mother, Jennifer Lovett. Bruising on her neck indicated the cause of death was strangulation. The coroner's office has confirmed the time of death as 4:30 a.m. on the morning of her discovery. Upon inspection of the property, there seemed to be no sign of breaking and entering, nor any sign of a struggle from Holly. Both her mother and father, Jennifer Lovett and Benjamin Lovett, are under investigation for the murder. During our inspection, flecks of blood could be found on the front bumper of Holly's car. Upon DNA analysis, the blood has been determined to be that of 22-year-old David Grant, who was killed in a hit-and-run incident on 34th Street 2 weeks ago. After a brief interview with Jennifer and Benjamin Lovett, we found that Holly arrived home late on the night of the incident. Both parents claim she has been acting peculiar since. We have decided to close David Grant's case at this time. The white sage and frankincense heady aroma invades the tiny walk-in closet space, singeing Marion and Ava's nostrils, suffocating their breathing and fueling their headaches. The room feels even smaller by the oppressive, oversized velvety purple and bohemian psychedelic-style tapestry draped loosely on the wall, casting shadows that whisper of impending doom. A chilling reminder of the terrors of their past lives, revealed by Maya, their psychic, whom they just met upon stumbling serendipitously together in the... Ladies, Maya, wearing a ruby-red silk caftan dress, leans in and asks. Ava shakes her head in disbelief as she straightens up on the emerald Victorian, deep-buttoned, tufted-up armchair. I am sorry. This is ridiculous. No way I was a kid, molested in my past life by my uncle, and no way was Marion, my psychologist, who couldn't save me from suicide. Exactly. Where do you get off telling people this kind of shit? Also sitting up, Marion protests with her voice croaking near the end, lending to the uncertainty of her own disbelief. Maya's clairvoyance session revealed a connection between Marion and Ava in their past lives. In the 1950s, Marion, named Dolores Barnett, was a forward-thinking psychologist who was treating Ava's, named Adelaide Reed, unknown mood disorder that was wrongly diagnosed as schizophrenia. Dolores believed Adelaide's condition was not simply schizophrenia, but a rather complex manifestation of dissociative identity disorder, an enigmatic disorder that caused a split personality, which was often linked to severe childhood trauma and abuse. She was pushing the boundaries of psychiatric treatment, employing innovative therapeutic techniques, including cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy in combination with medication management, in an attempt to uncover the underlying causes, alleviate symptoms, and provide Adelaide with the correct course of treatment. However, her research, discoveries, and work were constantly being dismissed and stonewalled by her male supervisor or peers. Adelaide ended up being prescribed the wrong drugs and treatment, worsening her condition. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, Adelaide began suffering terrifying nights alone with her Uncle Jack, who was sexually abusing her. Adelaide tried to confide in Dolores, but her family and Dolores' team were convinced this was one of her delusions. The following electroconvulsive therapy that ensued left Adelaide in a state of numbness. Yet inside she felt so destitute and alone that the only way she saw to take her pain away was to end her own life. Dolores was irreparably broken, as she carried the weight of the guilt for not acknowledging her suffering and advocating more for Adelaide. She blamed the limits of her time when they couldn't treat Adelaide properly, but most of all, she blamed herself. Her remorse plagued Dolores the rest of her life, ultimately leading her to also take her own life. As Maya leans back, the creaking sound of the tall cherry wooden chair pierces the air. She clenches her hands tightly. I tell it like it is. You don't have to believe me, but you must wonder. Maya emphasizes, why is it you two keep bumping into each in the most unlikely of places, in Portland, Maine? Why is it that whenever you two make contact, Marion, you find yourself sitting in that office? Marion felt chained to her chair, as though there was an invisible weight pressing against her body. She sat face to face across from a younger Ava, who was sitting on the couch, caterwauling in agony with her face painfully skewed, with no words or sound coming out. She stretched out her arms as if she was trying to reach out to somebody in the abyss. Marion still couldn't budge to reach Ava, despite all her force. Feeling utterly helpless, Marion buried her head into her hands, wailing. She noticed ruby-red liquid flowing toward her feet, like an army of microscopic-sized soldiers inching their way to the target, tainting each fiber of the carpet crimson red. Then suddenly, she felt drops of liquid dripping down her thighs. She saw her wrist was slit open with a gaping chasm, with blood pouring out. She looked back up and found herself in Ava's bathroom, seeing her lifeless body in the bathtub, her arm flung over the edge with her wrists slit, pools of blood spilling out of the tub. Marion shrieked in horror, gripping the armchair tightly. This flashback, exactly the one they had when met at the scavenger hunt, is sending them into a whirlpool of an otherworldly realm that feels intimately familiar, yet alien. Oscillating between both worlds, bodies steeped in blood, akin to their skin drenched in cold sweat, a sense of dizziness and queasiness consumes them. Ava and Marion, discombobulated, look at each other as though their whole lives have disintegrated before their eyes. A cloud of darkness, heaviness has descended, choking the room's oxygen. Coming back to this reality, Marion takes a deep exhale as if she has been holding her breath, and says, "What are we to do about this?" "There is one option," Maya leans in, narrowing her eyes. "And this is complicated. And I am not saying it's going to work. But I can call upon the spirits of your pasts to help rectify past misgivings." Ava and Marion both interject at the same time. "That," Ava resumes, That's ridiculous. No way am I participating in this farce." "Exactly. You're just making all this stuff up and want to make money off of us," Marion chimes in. "Ladies, I did not put these flashbacks in your heads. Why do you think you keep having them every time you see each other or are in contact with one another? You can certainly leave this all alone." Maya transfixes her gaze, her voice dropping to a menacingly slow and deliberate tone. "But remember, as I said earlier, these poor, trapped, afflicted souls will continue to visit you in your sleep, begging for your attention. Even more so now that you've met each other and awakened each other and vexed." A deluge of crimson blood breached through Marion's office door, surging in with fury, flooding the room with items beginning to sway and float. The rush of blood was overflowing Marion's mug with an image of a black Frisian horse, eventually cascading onto a two-tiered pie-crust mahogany table, reminiscent of a flowing chocolate fountain. Marion, frozen in place, was halfway submerged in the pool, with the tide rising slowly to her chest. Unable to speak or move, Marion's face contorted and grimaced in desperation, her widened eyes pleading for help, as she remained trapped and helpless. Completely immersed, she fought for her breath, choking and suffocating, eventually losing consciousness. As her eyes fluttered back open, she found herself sprawled out, face down, across Ava's black and white mosaic, hexagonal tiled bathroom floor. She watched, her eyes widened in terror, as Ava was in the tub, slicing across the thin film of her skin with a small blade, which gradually unfurled like a zipper, revealing a bottomless void. "Fuck!" Ava, waking up from the trance, buries her head into her hands and starts sobbing. Marion tries reaching out, comforting her, but Ava recoils. "Don't touch me!" Maya stands up and consoles Ava, with both her arms caressing her shoulders. "Ladies, I won't charge you for the seance session either. As I mentioned, I haven't seen something like this in quite a while. In order to start truly living the lives you want, you will need to speak to the souls of your past, to reduce the recurrence of dreams, of flashbacks, of whatever may spill into your current lives. You need to release this lingering trauma." Marion releases a deep exhale and says, "Fine. How do we get started?" What? Are you serious? I am not doing this. What choice do we have, Ava? I can't put up with this. All my life, I've always known something is wrong with me. I always feel this impending guilt, this doom in my life, like nothing I ever do is good enough for my family, for my husband, my daughter. I can't seem to want to be close to any of them. I'd bury myself in work. And why? Why this fear of being close? Maya, still standing behind Ava, why don't you two take a break and think about it? However, my schedule is quite full. I am only free this Sunday, and then blocked for the next couple of weeks. I do urge you to start sooner rather than later. Maya heads toward the exit. When you return, go to the checkout counter. Tell the clerk you're here for me. They should know. Maya disappears into the drapes. Marion leans into Ava, pleading, Ava, I know this is a lot to process, but I am begging you to think about it. You told me about your manic mood swings. Not being able to talk to your family about your issues because of their religious upbringing. Doesn't all of this sound strangely familiar? Ava, with her arms and legs crossed, nervously bites her lips as she silently stews in her thoughts. There's a reason we keep bumping into each other on this trip. There's a reason we connect so inexplicably well. There's a reason these flashbacks keep happening in each other's presence. Maya even said they will happen more, even when we're apart, because something has been awakened. Ava clings to her silence, hoping to find refuge from the chaos. Marion continues, Ugh, what if you just give ourselves this evening and tomorrow to think about it? If you want to do it, just meet me in front of the store at noon on Sunday. That is the only time I can make it. I am flying back on Monday with Ronan and Rhea. You have my number too. In a desperate frenzy, Ava rises abruptly and yanks the curtains open, blowing a gust of wind in Marion's direction, its acrid incense fragrant intensifying the atmosphere. Marion slumps in her chair as she sighs in defeat, realizing she may be trapped in this unending nightmare for the rest of her life. Get right on. In the dimly lit, sienna-tinged French-style cafe, Ava's body stiffens against the windowpane, eyes darting around the room, frantically inspecting every inch of her body, hands, her chest and legs, in an effort to confirm this is her own body, desperately clinging on to any last shreds of sanity. She nervously clutches her cappuccino, her hands shaking with unease, causing drops to spill onto the saucer. She tries to shake off yesterday's meetup with Maya and Marion as if it was all a nightmare. Yet she cannot help but wonder if this is part of her manic episode, or whether she has exaggerated the incident in her mind. She decides to call her cousin, Claire, who she sometimes confides in about her struggles. Claire, just like Ava, left the Catholic faith, albeit half-heartedly. While Claire no longer observes and abides by the strict practices of Catholicism, she still holds on to certain beliefs that resonate with her on a personal level. Claire? Oh, thank God. I thought you wouldn't pick up. Hey, Ava, what's going on? I am kind of in a bind, doing write-ups for a patient. I know. Sorry. You okay? You sound weird. How's Portland? Ava remains silent, which she embraces, as silence has been her peaceful solace. Ava! I don't know how to describe it. Ava, are you having another episode again? Look, did you take our meds? You know, call Dr. O'Hara? No, I can't. I don't want to talk to her. I just have to tell you. Do you believe? Ava stops herself before uttering words she believes to be insane, as she is trembling with tears welling up in her eyes. Ava, honey. Okay, tell me, let's talk it out for a bit. Claire covers the receiver and whispers to her colleague beside her. No. Can you help finish up the after-visit report? Okay, thanks. Ava, I am back. Breathe. So, I met this lady. She was so nice, warm, and easy to talk to. But every time we accidentally touch each other, like brush up against each other or whatever, I get these instant flashbacks of this child in a tub, filled with blood. Tears streamed down Ava's face, her sobs echoing throughout the quiet cafe, causing curious gazes from other patrons around her. Trying to stifle her crying, Ava turns her head to the side facing the window and covers her mouth to gain some semblance of control. Ava, did you take your meds? Yes, I took my meds. Ava bawls, suddenly aware of how loud she is getting again. The barista peers over at Ava with concern. I had been doing fine until I met this woman? Ava attempts to whisper. Okay, who is this woman? Why the tub? The blood? I don't know, Ava responds speedily. Her name is Marion. She's really kind. There's something about her that makes me feel as if she's some kind of a maternal figure in my life. Is it possible you're tired from traveling? Causing these occurrences? I wish. These flashbacks happened a few times, the last time being at the psychic's. You went to a psychic? No, Ava, no. This is not the course to deal with your ailment. I suggest you come home right now and see Dr. O'Hara right away. No, Dr. O'Hara wouldn't understand. She just forced me to try more meds. Ava, going to a psychic is a dangerous path. No wonder you are having these hallucinations. You are dealing with this dark magic that you have no idea what it'd turn into. You must at the very least protect your... Stop it. You sound just like Mom and Dad. Ava buries her head into her hand, wincing as if she's trying to suppress an inevitable pain from rising. Suddenly, she notices droplets of blood splattering on the marble tabletop. She checks everywhere to find where the blood is coming from. Suddenly, she notices a gash forming on her wrist, slowly unraveling into a fissure, with blood seeping through the tear. Shit. Ava shrieks as she jumps up from her chair, sending everything, including her leather jacket and crossbody handbag, crashing to the ground. The soft shatters abruptly cease, as everybody is staring at Ava, who's now kneeling on the floor examining her wrist. Ava! Claire is screaming into the phone that also flew on the floor. With each melancholic clop of her ankle cowboy boots, adorned with black and red outlays, the barista moves mindfully toward Ava, her eyes filled with concern, trying to unravel the mystery of Ava, who seems lost in her own world, desperately scratching at something. Ma'am, are you okay? Startled by the barista's sudden approach, Ava snaps her head and meets her gaze. The barista notices the prominent red scratches and marks on her wrist. Do you want me to call someone? No, thank you. Ava desperately wipes her face, her trembling hand seeking support as the barista extends a helping hand. Ava untangles her coat and purse straps from the chair and grabs her phone. She dashes out, fearing the patron's scrutiny. Ava! What's going on? You're scaring me. Ava stands outside the cafe entrance, struggling to put her coat back on, as the rain is pouring down relentlessly. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I am ok. Her voice trails off as she reassures Claire, which is barely audible over the sound of raindrop pounding the ground. She rummages through her coat pocket, searching for the crumpled tissues to wipe her runny nose, like a frenzied person in disarray. I gotta go. I have to go meet someone at noon. I'll call you later. The roofline caught Wade's attention, prompting him to carefully navigate the surrounding woods in search of an entrance to an unfamiliar and narrow trail. He cautiously approached the porch, carefully considering his next course of action, and surveyed his surroundings with anxiety and vigilance. As he made up his mind and attempted to leave, a sudden gust of wind forcefully pulled him into the house. With a resounding slam, the door forcefully closed, ushering Wade into the elegant foyer. A woman's voice called out to him, uttering his name. It emerged silently from the shadows, approaching him from his blind spot. He glanced over and spotted a woman who looked as if she were ready for a grand ball. Her long blonde hair, rosy cheeks, and vibrant ruby-red lipstick perfectly complemented her elegant long blue sequined gown. Wade, I've been anticipating your arrival. My name is Sophie. Unfortunately, our conversation time is quite limited at the moment. We need to get moving, she stated. Her voice was incredibly smooth and sweet as it whispered in his ear. Shortly afterward, a book fell to the ground, its dust cover absent. Wade stooped down to retrieve it, then examined the spine. 13 ghosts. Wade, a passionate reader of ghost stories, possessed an extensive knowledge of the book. Overwhelmed with regret, a wave of goosebumps washed over him as he spoke to her. Where are we headed? Instead, I'd rather just leave now. If you'd like to come, I will take you with me. I need to figure out how to open this stubborn door. Despite exerting all his strength, the door refused to budge. Oh, you're charming. But this is my home now. Her lips curled upward as she gazed at him. We should leave. Now. Her demeanor changed noticeably, with a distant look in her eyes. She guided him towards a specific collection of books on the wall in the room at the top of the stairs on the left, and she effortlessly moved through the stack, leaving Wade on the other side. Wade sensed a gentle pull on his shirt. Sophie opened the door and shoved him forcefully against the wall. They found themselves surrounded by a labyrinth of books. Wade's face became devoid of any emotion or color. His hair stood upright on his body. What just occurred? Did you go through the wall? How did you manage to accomplish that? Wade's voice trembled as he slowly retreated from her. He took a momentary break. Are you not a ghost? Oh, come on, Wade, she said with a smile. It's common knowledge that ghosts are nothing more than figments of our imagination. Wade instinctively pulled his head back, his gaze fixating on Sophie's appearance. Sophie locked eyes with Wade, her face conveying the gravity of her message. Wade, we will come across books along our journey. Please transport this bag to gather them. We must ensure that we collect every single one. This book. Just as he was about to finish speaking, another book fell to the ground. The Haunting. Wade leapt, his nerves in disarray. Sophie swiftly grasped it and discreetly stowed it away in his bag. Her appearance had transformed into that of a haunting figure, with bloodshot eyes, tattered garments, and a skeletal frame adorned with dusty cobwebs. A booming voice shook the house, trembling books in every room and throughout the maze. As Wade observed the rippling water, he couldn't help but hear a teasing rendition of an old tune. Sophie, Sophie, come out, wherever you are. The chaser's eerie melody sent shivers down Wade's spine, causing his teeth to chatter in fear. Release me immediately, Wade stated. His breaths were shallow and rapid, reflecting his anxiety. He's pursuing me. He's in charge of the library, Sophie said grimly, indicating his ghostly presence. This maze serves as our most formidable defense. We should consider making a swift departure. They continued running until Wade's adrenaline dwindled. They were seated on the chilly ground. Amidst his struggle to catch his breath, Wade inquired, "What is the reason behind his pursuit?" He wiped the sweat off his brow. "I am indebted to him. I prefer that he doesn't hand it over to him. However, should he apprehend me, I will be compelled to surrender it to him." She gazed into Wade's eyes and expressed her aversion to conflict. "Why does he discard the ghost stories I've already perused? It's causing me tremendous distress. This house makes me feel uneasy. I would like to depart. Could you please take me outside?" "Apologies, Wade, but we are nowhere near the outdoors." Sophie warned that the only way out was through the house, which could mean meeting the ghost. "I've already mentioned that I'm not afraid of confrontations." Wade leapt. Large eyes. "I am indifferent. I'll take the risk. I long to confront the individual responsible for that dreadful grating voice in person. I want to leave this location. I sense a feeling of being trapped, as if the surroundings are becoming increasingly constricting." "Watch your desires, Wade." After noticing that he regained his composure, she calmly said, "We're running out of time. We should leave." They continued without stopping until the next book was released. His body was covered in wriggling, creepy crawlies. I require some fresh air. Something is amiss here. I must find a way to leave this place." Anxiety surged within him like mercury, rising in a thermometer on a scorching day. "Wade, I will not abandon you." His breath caught in his throat. Thank goodness. He cradled his head in his hands. He was struck with a sudden and overwhelming realization. Regret overwhelmed his thoughts. "I wish this book dropping would cease," he exclaimed. "I'm feeling quite overwhelmed." "Nah." Sophie led the way, swiftly turning left and leaving Wade in the enveloping darkness. She halted abruptly upon realizing that Wade was no longer near her. He had paused to retrieve the uninvited which had fallen before him. The voice reverberated again, causing the windows to shatter and the floorboards to crack. It was commanding Sophie, "Emerge from the labyrinth. I can hear you inside. It's time for you and your guests to come out and confront me." He seems more agitated than before," Wade exclaimed, pressing his hand against his forehead. Moisture stains are encircling his underarms and collar. "I've already informed you, Wade, that he's searching for me, not you. I need to repay him and return all of these overdue books." Sophie attempted to reassure him. "It is imperative that we maintain a lead over him. Let's get going." "But why? What actions did you take?" "I'm finished with running," Wade declared. "He desires their return." Sophie arched an eyebrow before swiftly vanishing around another bend. The ghost echoed throughout the house in maze. "Sophie, please return what you have taken." Wade experienced profound despair due to the intense shrieks and repetitive groans that accompanied it. "Wade, there's something I need to discuss with you," she whispered. "The entire house is like a hidden library." "Oh, a library? A ghost library?" He spoke in a hushed tone. "Indeed, he is the librarian at this location. I am required to pay a charge for each book. However, we will face consequences if I decline to provide him with what he desires, because I still need to complete what he seeks." Wade paused, gazing at her, profoundly contemplating her words. He swallowed nervously. As he inquired about my presence, the haunting of Hill House abruptly disappeared into his bag. Another book, House on a Haunted Hill, tumbled from the shelf. This time, it landed right in front of Sophie. The wind grew fierce, and Wade could hear the sound of pages flipping rapidly. He felt a chill as the temperature dropped to 25 F, and the air was filled with his breath. Wade attempted to resist the wind's power, but failed because of its strength. The wind carried him effortlessly through the intricate maze, eventually leading him into the heart of the library. The library's resident ghost, the The ghost librarian greeted Wade as he approached the entrance. Wade immediately recognized the familiar voice, no longer filled with fear. Sophie had successfully delivered Wade, fulfilling her part of their agreement. "Greetings, Wade. I've been anticipating your arrival," it said. "A library card is required for entry. I just came to return these books." "I have no interest in your library card," Wade stated. He emptied the bag of books and positioned himself at the check-in counter. The spook met Wade with a piercing gaze. Wade observed the intimidating expression on its visage and the eerie green glow emanating from the spook. He noticed tiny black dots nestled within the empty yellowed sockets instead of eyes. However, what truly terrified Wade were the bulging purplish veins that grotesquely marred his face. Ignoring Wade's request to leave, the spook seemed unfazed. Wade reiterated his desire to depart. "I appreciate your help, but I would like to leave now if you don't mind." The individual carefully retrieved the books from the counter and meticulously examined each. "I was directing my attention to Wade's eyes." Wade was handed a library card and a gentle reminder. "Wade, it seems you may have overlooked the main message today." The spirit emphasized the significance of the lesson learned from your excursion today. "Wade, can't you see? You will be unable to leave this place permanently. You're not going anywhere. You are part of our community." Curiosity has a certain duality about it. The creature grinned widely, revealing its darkened, stained, and yellow-spotted teeth as it looked at Wade. The spook librarian's lips released a most unsettling laugh. Wade's face had turned pale. His stomach was filled with unease, and his mouth was dry from the lack of moisture. As he attempted to scream, his voice morphed into an eerie laughter reminiscent of the librarian's unsettling chuckle that Wade had encountered earlier that day. The spook disappeared without a trace. Now to Sophie, Wade heard a voice say from somewhere deep within the house's walls or maze. Wade found himself alone in the library, with no escape. "You know, we could so easily just turn left at these lights and head home, right?" She said these words laced with the slightest edge of humor. Olivia stared down at her freshly acquired Starbucks coffee that was gently squeezed between her legs. "I mean, we could be home in just over an hour and still have time for you to watch your game." Her husband furrowed his brows as he gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Honey," Nate said in that tone that drove Olivia nuts. "This will be fun, I promise." He gave her a reassuring smile. "I know," she replied. "It's just so damn cold, and once it gets dark, it's only going to get colder." She snuck a hopeful glance at Nate. "Well, if it's cold, then I'll keep you warm," Nate said, a smirk appearing on his lips. "It will be a night you'll never forget." Olivia shuddered. She had never been fond of camping, especially tent camping. Sleeping in a structure that was made of flimsy nylon and gave virtually no protection from anything lurking outside its thin walls, well, that was not her idea of fun. She glanced over at her husband, telling herself to lighten up. It had been a long time since Nate had seen his cousin Tommy, and she had never met him. A weekend camping together with him was something Nate had always wanted to do. Nate was singing along to the radio, a big smile on his face. The smile that had always melted her heart since the day they met. She felt herself relax ever so slightly. "This here is God's country. You won't find nicer scenery anywhere," Nate said. He smiled at Olivia as he reached over and gave her leg a gentle squeeze. Olivia returned his smile, then settled back in her seat and turned to look at the passing scenery. Nate was right. It was a beautiful area. She looked onto a valley that was cloaked in mist, a towering hill rising behind it like a sentinel. A single maple tree stood tall in the middle of a field, its leaves already turned by the changing of the season, threatening to release themselves to the air. "Didn't you say that you've had family in this valley since 1896? She asked. "That's right. They came from Yorkshire. I think that's in northern England," he replied. Nate turned the car onto a quieter road, and after a few minutes, they drove onto an old wooden bridge that crossed a meandering river, its water level low after a summer's worth of heat. Two kids were fishing from the edge of the bridge, and as their car passed, they stopped what they were doing and watched them go by. Olivia found this a bit odd. Nate chuckled, altering his voice to a southern drawl. "Well, I guess then their kids don't see too many city folk round these parts." Olivia laughed despite herself. "Stop it," she said. "They were just a couple of regular kids, not hillbillies." She playfully gave Nate a smack on his arm. "They weren't even wearing overalls," she said. "They're wearing—" She paused as she turned her head to look back onto the bridge they were just exiting. "Well, that's strange," she said. "What is?" asked Nate. "They're gone," she replied. "Seriously, how is that possible?" Despite herself, Olivia felt a tiny ripple of electricity crawl up the back of her neck. She shivered. "Pull over, Nate," she said. "Let's take a look." "Take a look at what?" Nate complained. "Look, we're already running late. We're supposed to meet Tommy at 7 and it's already past that." "Please, just give me 2 minutes," she said. Nate reluctantly pulled the car off to the side of the road. He noticed that the light was starting to fall, and the road ahead was already starting to darken, encroached by huge Douglas fir trees, their arms draped with heavy moss. Olivia jumped out as soon as their Subaru jolted to a stop, and she ran back onto the antiquated bridge. "Watch out for bears," Nate teased. "Or Bigfoot." She ignored him and walked towards the bridge deck. The boys were nowhere to be seen. She stopped at the exact spot that they had seen them, then rested her hands on the guardrail and peered over the edge to the moving water below. Nothing. She slowly looked around her, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boys as they ran off. But there was nothing to be seen. How on earth could they have run off so quickly? It just didn't make sense. She looked down at the bridge deck, and between her feet she noticed a strange object. It looked like an antler or horn from some kind of animal. "Makes sense," she thought, as they had passed a lot of farms on the way to this spot. She slowly bent down and reached out to pick it up. What the heck was this thing? Just as her hand was about to grasp it, a loud sound erupted. "Aye!" She jumped and screamed in fright. Nate had honked the car's horn. "Come on, Liv, we've got to go." "They're gone? Kids run fast. Let's get going." Angry with herself for being so jumpy, and angry at Nate for being so impatient, she took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Impulsively, she reached down and grabbed the object at her feet, depositing it into her jacket's pocket. She turned and headed back to the car. "For Christ's sake, Nate, that was uncalled for," she uttered as she climbed back into their car. Nate was grinning. "Did I scare you?" "I did, didn't I?" he said. "No, you didn't," she replied. His schoolboy charm that he seemed to think was his superpower sometimes aggravated her. Exactly like right now. "You don't think it's odd that they just disappeared?" "Nope," he answered, already pulling the car back onto the road. Olivia took a few deep breaths to try and slow her heart rate down. Why did he have to do that? She thought to herself. They carried on down the road, the darkness of the approaching evening coming quicker than expected. "Wow, it's dark on this road," Olivia exclaimed. "Well, look at the size of these trees, Liv. They're so big they block out most of the natural light. You know these are all second-growth trees, right? Bet they don't mention those kinds of facts when you go to those protests, do they? He said. Please don't start, Nate, she said, feeling her face flush a little with anger. Nate knew that she considered herself an environmental. She was quick to point out that fact on their very first date. He said he understood and accepted her views, but he made it clear that he came from a forestry family, and logging and millwork had supported his family for generations. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Nate said. You know I agree with lots of what you say about this issue, but don't forget Tommy is a redneck logger. His views aren't quite as liberal as mine about stuff like this. That doesn't mean he still isn't a great guy. It's just that he's a little more black and white on the subject than I am. Olivia bit her tongue. She was going to make a comment about banjos and porches, but thought twice about it. Maybe I should have brought a roll of duct tape to cover my mouth, she said. Hell yes, that would have been a great idea, Nate said. Olivia reached over and gave him a playful punch on the arm. Shit, Nate yelled out. He pulled to the side of the road. He covered his eyes with his hands. Geez, Nate, I barely touched you, Olivia uttered, confused by Nate's drastic actions. No, it's my eyes again, he replied. Nate, you really should get that checked out. It's not normal. I know, he replied. I just don't get it. What is up with this stabbing pain? It's so weird. Last time it happened, I was at home in the bathroom, and after the pain started subsiding, I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a few seconds, I swear my eyes looked different. He stopped rubbing his eyes and shook his head. He turned his head and gave a wan smile to Olivia. It's stupid. Never mind. Olivia reached over and rubbed his back. Just do me a favor and get your eyes checked, okay, babe? She said. Yes, dear, he said, rolling his eyes. Now let's get there before everyone has gone to bed. They continued on as night descended, the houses becoming fewer and farther between. They drove in silence, the darkness enveloping them like a cloak, leaving them alone with their own thoughts. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. You know, I never asked you. Is it a campsite we're going to? Or... Actually, no. It's an old piece of property that our grandfather used to own. He was a cantankerous old bugger who everyone called Papa, he replied. Oh, I see, Olivia said. This fact didn't help assure her. Here they were arriving in the darkness in the middle of nowhere, not to a nice bright campsite with a store fellow campers. Oh no, they were going to sleep in the middle of nowhere with a redneck cousin whom she had never met, on a piece of backwoods property that was passed down by a crazy grandfather. Let me guess. The property looks out onto a swamp, right? She asked her husband. Expecting a quick response, she groaned when Nate just glanced over at her and gave her a dubious look. Oh, you've got to be kidding, she exclaimed. Nate grinned. Hope you packed your bug spray, he said, chuckling to himself. Suddenly he sprang to attention, something ahead on the road catching his attention. Hey, I think we're here, he called out. He slowed the car as they approached a sign that arched across a dirt road that veered off to the right. The sign said, "The Old Homestead," painted in a childlike scrawl. Above the sign was the largest set of antlers that Olivia had ever seen. She groaned inwardly and sank down deeper into her car seat. They drove for what seemed like an eternity to Olivia. Finally, they spotted a light ahead, and they spotted an old Ford pickup truck parked in front of a raging bonfire. A man in a cowboy hat was tossing wooden pallets out of the back of the truck. Tommy sure does like big fires. Nate laughed. He bent over and gave Olivia a kiss on the cheek. We're going to have a great weekend, don't worry, he whispered. Olivia replied with a weak smile. She opened her mouth to speak, but Nate was already clambering out of the driver's seat. "Well, if it isn't my long-lost cousin Tommy Two-Tone," Nate called out. The man in the hat jumped down and walked over to Nate. "No one has called me that since 1983, but I'll let you get away with it." He flashed an easy smile. The two cousins shook hands and quickly apprised each other. "Boy, you've put on a few pounds, my boy," Tommy joked, poking him gently in the stomach. "Look who's talking, you old cowboy. How about sharing your treasure with me?" Nate said. Tommy laughed, reaching down into his cooler to grab a beer. "Want one?" he asked. "Do bear shit in the woods?" Nate replied. "Well, they sure do around here," Tommy said. Olivia cautiously walked up next to Nate. "Ah, hey. This is my wife, Olivia. I don't think you guys have met before." "I'm Tryman." "Pleased to meet you, Olivia. I've heard lots about you. Did you bring your hand drum along? You know, the one you use at your protests?" Nate and Olivia stood in shocked silence. After a few awkward seconds, Tommy broke into laughter. "Just teasing you. Hell, you are welcome to your opinions, even if I don't agree with them. Doesn't mean we can't be friends." He smiled at her, then took a swig of his beer. Nate laughed. "Oh, hell, you've got to meet my old lady," Tommy said. "Hey, Denise, come on out and meet our guests." After a moment, they hears the sound of a zipper on a tent quickly opening. A face appeared, wearing a big smile and even bigger hair. "Well, how y'all doing?" she said. She exited the tent and walked towards the trio. "My name is Denise. So nice to meet y'all," she said. Somewhere in Olivia's mind, she registered the fact that this lady just said "all" twice in a matter of minutes. She reminded herself to be nice. After introductions were complete, they sat down next to the fire, feasting on chili and winers that Tommy had cooked up. After dinner, Tommy offered to help Nate set up camp. Bull. Nate excused himself and went off to set up their tent, leaving Olivia by the fire to get acquainted with Denise. Their conversation flowed easily, and Olivia found herself starting to relax and enjoy herself. She realized that these people were actually pretty cool. She chastised herself for ever thinking any differently about them. When Tommy and Nate returned, the four of them sat around the fire, sharing stories and telling jokes. Nate tried to tell a ghost story, but it didn't come off as remotely scary. Olivia laughed, and then something was triggered in her brain. An old legend that she had heard about when she was a kid. A legend about something that happened in this area. "Hey, I just remembered something from way back. It must have been lodged deep in my memory banks, and being here tonight has brought it to the surface," she said. She had their attention now, and they all looked at her eagerly. "It was about a goat or something, or a crazy man who thought he was a goat. I can't remember the specifics. Apparently, he used to roam the woods in this valley, and all of the local dogs would start to howl. Parents would run outside and pull their kids inside when they heard that howl." Olivia stared into the glowing coals of the fire. The details of the story were still rushing back to her, and she couldn't stop herself from telling the whole story. One night they found the body of an old man in the woods, and he didn't look quite right. They said he had hooves where hands should have been, and horns coming out of his head. And when the police were lifting his body onto a stretcher, they felt like they were being watched from the woods. One cop even said he saw little kids watching, and then they ran. Olivia laughed to herself, surprised by how carried away she had become with the story. The fire had burned down as she spoken, and the night wind blew across her shoulders, causing her to shiver. "Sorry guys for going on and on. You must think I'm pretty silly," she said. She shivered again and put her hands into her coat pocket. She felt something hard against her right hand, and she pulled it out and held it before the light of the dwindling fire. She realized with certainty that she was holding a goat's horn. She heard a voice come from her left side. "Not silly at all," it said. The voice didn't sound quite right. It was high-pitched and had a strange quality to it. She turned to look at Tommy and Denise. A scream rose in her throat as she watched them awkwardly struggle to their hind legs. They were quite changed, with horns growing from their heads and fur now covering their faces. They moved towards her, scraping their cloven hooves along the ground. "We liked your story a lot," Tommy croaked. "Reminds me of the good old days when Papa was still with us." Olivia screamed. "Nate! Oh God, Nate! Help me!" She turned to face Nate. A silent scream developed deep inside of her, preparing to erupt from her throat. Nate was standing in front of her, rubbing his hooves together in anticipation. In a strange moment of clarity, she could see how the pupils of his eyes had transformed onto horizontal slits. "I told you it would be a night you'll never forget, my darling," he bleated, just before he leapt upon her.